involvement, foster care, etc. And so I bring that to the table, and I'm co-chair of the Healthy Children's Task Force. And the other co-chair is Dr. Avra Goldman, who's a Cambridge resident, a parent, and a physician. And so we chair the task force together. And Avra is going to be sort of leading us through and moderating the event. A couple of just housekeeping notes. We are recording the event. And so for folks to know that. If you have questions, the chat feature is not enabled in a webinar, so please use the Q&A feature in the webinar. You can put your questions in there. I will be moderating those or monitoring those questions, and then I will ask those questions of the panelists at the appropriate time. So please, that's where you can communicate. I think that's about it in terms of the housekeeping, Q&A, and the recording. So without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Avra, who is going to take it from here.
Thank you, Mark, and welcome, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us, and special thanks to our panelists who will introduce themselves in a minute. So I'm Avra Goldman, a longtime Cambridge resident and parent, and I'm a family doctor at Boston Medical Center, and deal with lots of people with addiction and substance use issues. So just a couple quick words of background. The Teen Health Survey is done nationally and in Cambridge as well, and it's done every 2 years. And the last one was based on questionnaires that were filled out by middle school and high school kids in Cambridge in May and June of 2022. And I was looking over that just earlier today, and looking specifically at substance use issues. And interestingly, Cambridge does quite well compared to the rest of the state of Massachusetts. And the biggest substances that kids reported using were alcohol was the biggest, and then marijuana was the next one. And it did show improvement from before 2022. So 2022 was an improved year from the couple years before that it had been done. Boys use more than girls. Older children use more alcohol and marijuana than others. Tobacco use is pretty small, luckily, but still exists, and vaping is there, but not too high. So those were the main observations. So I will ask each of these. Thank you to our panelists so much. And I will ask you guys each to introduce yourselves. And Ellen, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Hello, everybody. My name is Ellen Colton. I am a former Cambridge resident. My daughter graduated from Cambridge Rindge in Latin, and definitely had a little career with substance use. And she has been substance free now for 6.5 years. But in those time, she put our family through hell. And in the process, I became a facilitator for a group that is an alternative to AA and Al-Anon. It's called Smart Recovery. And I work with families who have either a child or a partner or a parent who is struggling with substance use. So I've been doing that for about 5 years. And like Avra, I also work at Boston Medical Center. So thank you for coming.
Thank you, Ellen. Kathy.
Good evening, everybody. Pleasure to be here. My name is Catherine Rocco Blevins. I'm a clinical social worker. I currently work at Cambridge Rindge and Latin School. I've been there. This will be my 18th year as a clinician there. I do macro level kind of whole school work around education, prevention, both with teachers, administrators, and obviously our students, and do some small group and individual counseling with kiddos who are more affected by substance misuse, particularly around psychoeducation and obviously access to treatment resources, and do a lot of referral work and education with parents. So it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And Connor, introduce yourself, and then maybe we can go right into your interview.
Sure. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Connor Epstein Kraus, and I am a board certified health and wellness coach and community liaison with the Cambridge Public Health Department. In my work, I do a lot of individual work with youth and families around a number of topics. Substance abuse and misuse is one of them. And as Avra had just mentioned, we're going to start today's session after these introductions with an interview I had with a client of mine who, for a number of years, was navigating substance misuse in their own life. And we had a short to mid-length interview that we're going to share with you, which is just some questions that I was asking him about his experience. And we're hoping that that will inform some of the questions that might follow and lead to some good conversations. The one thing I'll also add just before we start the recording is that these are sensitive topics. And so some of what is discussed might be difficult to hear. And also it's just one individual's experience and perspective. As I'm sure we all know, everybody is different and all of our journeys are different. And so even when there is common ground and similarity, it is not a one-to-one translation from one person's experience with substance to another. So please take anything that this client and I might say, into consideration, that it may not be exactly applicable to the situation you might currently be in. So having said that, I'm going to start the recording and share my screen.
Well, thank you for speaking with me tonight. As we're getting started, can you just share a bit about
your journey and what led you to start using substances in the first place?
Okay. Sure. I started out in high school as someone who said to themselves, I will never take part in any type of substance usage or drug culture or anything like that. I had it in my head that I was on the straight and narrow from now until when I graduated from college, basically. And I know now that a lot of people know what I do, and it doesn't always stay that way. And I learned in my own experience that was kind of feeling like I didn't fit in. And I first tried to start hanging out with groups of people that I wouldn't normally call my friends and didn't really have the values that my other friends did, just so that I could feel like I was part of something that was more socially acceptable or cool than everyone else I usually hang out with. And that's the case with a lot of people, and I wouldn't say that's uncommon, but the real tipping point for me was when I got into my first really long-term committed relationship with somebody. And obviously I was so head over heels for them and so excited for this new chapter of my love life, which hadn't really existed yet until then, that I was basically willing to go along with whatever they said. And when that was first doing some sexual things I didn't want to do, and that led into doing some drug things to enhance that, I just went along with it because I was like, this is what everyone else is doing at this age. And honestly, I'm kind of late to the party because I was kind of old for my grade. So I was like, okay, I need to get on this as soon as possible. I'm being left out if I don't go down this road immediately, is basically what I was thinking, without really any regard for what would happen in the future. So when my friend introduced me to smoking lots of weed out of his big bong at his house, that was what I wanted to do all the time, just as soon as keep that idea in my head.
So it sounds like it was because you weren't feeling like you were fitting in anywhere, and a big piece of it was wanting to feel accepted by people.
Yeah, I felt left out for a lot of reasons. I felt left out because I wasn't in a relationship. I felt left out because I didn't have like the cool friends that everyone else did. I felt left out because I didn't take as many risks as other people in my grade did, but I was older than them, so that made me feel bad even more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. When did you first start to realize that your use of substances was becoming a problem?
I would say that I kind of was in denial for a while. For the first 3 months after I started smoking weed and doing like concentrates and whatever with my boyfriend, we broke up, and that made me, I kind of left a hole. And what I had left was the stuff that we used to do. And that was kind of how I wanted to fill the gap. And I knew that was unhealthy, but I kind of didn't know what else to do. And I didn't consider it a problem when I started doing it more often, and then every day, and then every night, and then multiple times a day. And I was like, at that point, after about 3 months of that, I was like, is this what everyone else is doing? Is this still what everyone else is doing? And it seemed like the answer was no, because people seem to be getting worried about me a little, because I seem to have changed in their eyes. And I guess that's when I started getting worried for myself, just a little bit, but I didn't really care that much. It was just in the back of my mind. So it was about 6 months after my first experience.
So about 6 months after was when you first start to notice a difference between your use and like some of your peers' uses.
Yeah.
Was there any point where you kind of looked up and were like, oh, okay, now like there is like a consequence of this, or there's a clear sign that I need to do something about this?
Yeah. I would say when I started coming to school high all the time, to the point that I couldn't focus in class, I couldn't get any of my homework done. My physics teacher started calling me the brick wall because I just stared at the wall all class and didn't say anything and didn't write anything on my paper ever. I didn't like physics, but that was not normal behavior for me. I was usually like someone who tried to get an A in every class, even though that was unreasonable. The shift in my like school related behavior, that was when I started to see consequences because my grades started to drop a lot. And I don't know, I just wasn't existing in the same world as I used to.
Yeah. And when you started to realize that, were you able to do anything at the time to try to change paths?
Yes, I'm kind of a reactionary person, and when I started, I left it for a couple months, like thinking, oh, maybe it's not a problem, maybe everyone else does this, and sure, some other people did that, but those were not the people I used to compare myself to for sure. Um, After a couple months and another breakup with somebody, I was like, okay, I'm turning my life around now, and I decided to quit. And I lasted for like a month. I was so much clearer that whole month. I felt so much better, and I knew that, but it still didn't stop me from going back to what I did before a month later.
What When you did return to it like a month later, even after noticing that you were clearer, what was it that brought you back to it, to substances?
It was the comfort, the routine, the ability I was starting to have to live in my own fantasy version of my own life that living in reality couldn't provide me with. At that point, I didn't really want to be in my old life that I'd left behind. I had this made up version of who I was and who everyone else saw me as, and what like I looked like to other people that I wanted to chase instead of being a genuine version of myself. And using substances allowed me to just kind of create this illusion for myself.
Mhm. So it was kind of like a coping mechanism for your situation.
Yeah, I knew things were going down the drain, but I felt like it just felt better to do that.
Hmm. Were there any other ways, like coping mechanisms, strategies, techniques that you were trying around that time to feel better instead of substances?
Um, the only one I really was consistent with was exercising, weightlifting. But honestly, that ended up being one of the reasons that I wanted to keep going because I felt like it kind of helped me in the weirdest way.
Helped you like manage your substance intake?
No, I felt like, well, marijuana specifically, I felt like it helped me exercise.
Oh, okay. So exercising while being a healthy coping strategy also in some ways fed your desire to continue using marijuana.
Yeah, funny as that is.
Yeah. Was there anything else that you had tried to do that just completely missed the mark and wasn't helpful at all, or maybe was even, unhelpful?
Um, well, when I tried to start smoking weed, I decided to smoke cigarettes instead. That wasn't helpful. Now I'm addicted to nicotine and weed. And then I had two problems. Then I started drinking instead because I wanted to stop those two. Well, then I had three problems. And at that point, I realized I couldn't add any more problems. But then I had all of those. And I was like, wow, I was supposed to be going one at a time. And now I have three at the same time.
Hmm. What made you eventually decide to seek help for these issues?
Well, this is a really funny story. I'm not someone who takes suggestions very well. And my parents were constantly pressuring me to do something about what was happening and the change in my life that happened super fast in their eyes. And honestly, the more they told me to get some help for it, the less I wanted to do it. And it was only when they started to give in and they realized that if they sort of acted fine with it, I would start to realize what I was doing to my life. And that might not be applicable to everyone, and it sounds scary, but when they started sort of endorsing my terrible choices is when I was like, what are you doing? And then I was like, what am I doing? And then I was just like, I need to do something about this for myself on my own.
It almost sounds like they gave you the space to fail, and that's when you realized that you had to solve it yourself.
Yeah.
Was there any way that your parents could have communicated with you differently or just engaged with you differently to have better supported you?
Let me see. Minor roadblock is I can't remember this period of my life particularly well, but I think I was craving some sort of freedom. And the more they clamped down on me, the more I wanted to do what I wasn't supposed to do. And the feeling of rebelling was really what was driving this in the beginning, because that was my original reason for wanting to start acting differently and hanging out with different groups of people. So I think if we had a more unbiased conversation about just sort of the stages I'd been going through, instead of just focusing on what was wrong and what was right and what was bad and what was good, and just a more like bigger perspective sort of conversation about the sorts of choices people make in their late adolescence might have been more useful for me. I'm not really 100% sure what that would have looked like considering the kind of life that was going on at that time, but my parents were pretty rigid in their perspective.
So a little bit more flexibility, a little less preconceived bias may have allowed you to yourself kind of relax into their support a little bit.
Yeah, exactly.
What could your friends have done differently to better support you during that time?
It's hard to say because they knew something was happening, but they didn't know how it happened or much about why. But I'm sure they could have guessed too, but they were also afraid to say anything that would upset me. But I almost wanted them to talk to me about it more openly. The closest I ever got to that was when my friend came to my house and started throwing away all my weed stuff and my other drug stuff. And I was too high and almost passed out at that point to do anything about it. And later I was so angry about it. But she would tell me that she was doing the right thing in her mind, so I couldn't be mad about it. But that only made me want to keep doing what I was doing even more. I don't think that kind of stepping in is the right thing to do. But verbal sort of stepping in, like around the concepts and the future and the reasons behind things would have been much more helpful.
So maybe instead of coming into your room and throwing out all of your stuff. It would have been like coming into your room and having just a conversation about all of this stuff and your relationship with it.
Yes, and that would have made me realize maybe that my relationship with it was more than unhealthy.
Mm. What strategies or relationships have helped you on your path towards recovery?
Well, it's more like a different perspective that I gained that helped me move towards recovery. Because when I went to college for the first time, I basically went crazy with the amount of substances I was using because I was so far away from home and no one could tell me not to. But I ended up not even being able to finish that semester at the college that I had always wanted to go to. And that honestly taught me a lesson that I needed to hear because I knew that I wanted to go to college, but I clearly couldn't do it in the state that I was in, and I had been for almost 2 years. And even though I couldn't fix it for myself right then, I knew it. That was when I knew that I had to fix it at some point.
It was that kind of ultimate failure to live up to your own expectations that kind of shook you into
Yeah.
taking action.
I didn't care about anyone else's expectations, but when it was clear to me that I couldn't even do what I wanted anymore, was when things changed in my mind. I realized I was living in kind of a fantasy that wouldn't work out.
In your opinion, how can communities, parents, just everyone, help to reduce the stigma around substances and better support individuals who are on this journey?
I think it's much better to tell people, instead of something being bad, that the amount of usage is bad. Because there's an amount of substance you can consume in a healthy way that you can still do everything that's required of you in life and still have good relationships, a good healthy body, and a good financial standing with yourself. But the balance is what's the most important, and many people don't understand what the balance is. Their idea of the balance is completely skewed in the wrong direction. And it's more important to, instead of punishing people for even trying something, is to remind them that things might be getting a little bit out of hand in a nice way. That maybe they, instead of threatening with them with the threat of stopping forever, which is just going to make them want to do it more, telling them that they might want to consider significantly reducing their use and seeing what that does for their perspective, because it inevitably will change their perspective, even if they don't stop altogether.
So just presenting different scenarios that aren't complete abstaining from use or using all the time.
Yes, because there is a giant middle ground there between total abstinence and 24/7 almost constant use.
Based on your experiences, what advice would you give to other parents who suspect or know that their child is struggling with substance misuse?
Honestly, it might sound counterintuitive, but instead of threatening to take things away or throw things away, it would be better to simply gently confront them and maybe throw in an anecdote about someone that you know who's doing about the same way in your part of life, how that's worked out for them. But I emphasize that it's really about the tone and the kind of words that are used to present this. It can't, if it gets too on the judgmental side, people are my age are just gonna start retaliating in whatever way, which is probably just verbally, and then by going back to what they're doing, probably more. There's a fine line, and it's hard to find the difference between judging and showing genuine concern without threatening, but also reminding the person what is happening.
If you were counseling a friend or a peer who themselves was struggling with some of these issues, what advice might you give to them at this point, or how might you support them?
Honestly, what I would say is, like, if they were doing what I was doing, I would say, don't you want to remember this part of your life? Don't you want this to mean something to you in the future? Like, the older you get, the time passes faster. You're still really young. Like, for me, I can't remember a single bit of my senior year of high school, which is supposed to be, yeah, a lot of fun, but it's also supposed to be a nice memory for the rest of your life. I would say, just, isn't there anything in the moment that you're living in that you want to hold on to? Because by avoiding everything, you're basically losing it forever.
Yeah. And I guess last is, if you were able to give a piece of advice to policymakers at like the city, school, or like a health department level, what would you suggest that they try to do to help prevent substance misuse in the first place?
It's really about the accuracy of the information that people hear. I mean, really, each substance is a different thing, but I think marijuana specifically has a lot of like rumor and not true information that is passed around about it. It's either terrible or completely harmless, and neither is true at all. It's actually a spectrum between those two things depending on how much you're using. And I think that's what should be emphasized.
So more accurate information about the different substances and the continuum of, largely benign to very consequential
Yeah.
consequences
I
that
mean,
can
as
happen.
counterintuitive as it might sound, having more public information on things will actually help without glorifying them, of course. But a lot of what leads people into doing this is totally just curiosity. They hear about this thing for their whole life, and then they can't resist getting pulled into it. And the more like stories you hear about something, the more you're gonna sort of look up to this thing.
Hmm. So kind of demystifying it in some ways.
Yeah, it's just a chemical. It's just a thing. It's not that amazing. It's not that special. It's just a thing.
Yeah.
Just a drug.
Just a drug. And I'm going to give you one last final question, even though I just said last question, which is just, what do you think is the most significant lesson that you've learned from this experience?
Time passes a lot faster than you think, and you're going to wish that you could still live in some of the time that you lost.
Powerful. Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate your answers.
Thank you, Connor. So first question for you, Connor. I never asked you and don't know how you guys cross paths and if you were involved at all in helping him out, and then just your reflections on what he said.
Yeah. So initially it was this individual's parents that contacted me. They had been referred to me by another professional. I can't remember who right now. So I had started meeting with this individual when they had just finished their senior year and were preparing to go to college. And this was that first attempt at college that he had alluded to. And so the context of our meeting at the time was very much about just trying to get him ready for college. But as with a lot of things, it was complicated by life and by circumstances. And he did go off to college, tried to make it work, and as he mentioned, it didn't work. So he came back home, and we spent essentially the next 2 semesters really doing the deep work to make sure he was in a place where he was actually able to really commit and give himself a fighting chance at college. So yeah, I was there kind of for not like the I guess, the lowest of the journey that he was in. But certainly there was a few ups and downs in our time working together, and we still do occasionally. We have check-ins, every month or two, just to make sure everything's still going okay. And that's kind of where our relationship is now.
And I want the second part of the question,
Yeah.
but it sounds like you and the public health department can be resources for families.
Yes. Yeah. And I will just say that being a health and wellness coach, the work I do with individuals like this person is different than what a traditional therapist or a social worker or a substance abuse counselor would do. So my role in this case is not to tell him what he should do or shouldn't do, but more or less to ask him questions of, what do you want to be doing? And, is this in line with your values and your future? And, where do you see your substance use being in 5 years? And if it's not in line with where your use is now, what steps do you think you should take to get there? Is this a priority for you? So my role is much less to push him or her or whoever it is to solve the problem, and it's much more to kind of wait with them and hold the space with them until they say, hey, you know what, I'm ready to solve this problem now. And there is a space for all of these roles together. So while I was working with this individual, especially in that kind of second phase after the first attempt had not worked out, a lot of the work we started doing was initially looking into program options. Like, do you want to try a residential program? Do you want to try an intensive outpatient program? Do you want to try, a virtual group? And just exploring various options with him, recognizing that it's not my role to counsel him through substance misuse, more to help him find his own answers. And sometimes those answers are another professional that is going to help on a different level of that continuum of care. So that was a piece. And then I guess just to answer that question of just like my thoughts as this person is still not, I would say, fully recovered. They are still in this, and it's still something that they're working through, and they're still seeing a therapist at their college now, and in a substance group. And so the journey continues, and like Ellen had hinted at, it is a process. And even when you reach a point where things are no longer in a crisis, it can still take years for the harm and the damage, physically, emotionally, relationally, to be repaired. And it's just important to kind of be patient and stay by their side, and hope that if you continue to provide that non-judgmental support, that eventually they'll be able to figure it out.
Thank you. Thanks. Kathy, I'd love to hear your thoughts when at Ringe, when you see kids like this client of Connor's, who just sounds like he was just falling apart and not focused. So what kinds of thoughts do you have, and how might you handle it?
I think when I was listening, I think what resonated initially for me was the sense of wanting to connect, wanting to belong, wanting to find a group that someone can fit in and feel like they can be themselves. I think in high school, as we all have experienced, like developmentally, that's a goal, to find this tribe that you can fit into, be yourself, be comfortable in your own skin. And I think at times, kiddos are really desperate for connection. And I think they mold and modify themselves to be included in a group. So time and time again, I've often seen, I think one thing I think about as a clinician and as a parent is when there's shifts in your kiddo's peer group, right? And what is that really about? And what are they trying to connect? And, who are these new folks who are potentially influencing, your child's life? So that is something I see a lot. And I have these difficult conversations with parents and with teachers to say, what is your kiddo seeking? What kind of connection? And can we kind of create that for them versus them seeking it in this kind of sabotaging way? So, connection for me is always a very big deal. The sense of belonging, again, developmentally is this real need and desire. And I think it can be a really beautiful process. And at the same time, it's incredibly destructive.
And just thank you. And then if parents specifically are worried about their child, do they approach you and then the other counselors at the high school, or what might you suggest they do?
I appreciate that question because I know the need is great. And I think over the past several years, I think we can all agree that mental health services has been, kind of this overwhelming, oh, we need resources, we need some therapists, skillful folks to meet with our kiddos. And I think the schools have taken on a chunk of that need. And it's no longer, if you will, school related. Or academically driven. It's about wellness. So I think parents can absolutely reach out to their school community. At CRLS, we're broken down into 4 smaller schools. We do have, a dean, a psychologist, social workers. So there are a lot of resources, guys, comparatively speaking, too. It's amazing what Cambridge Public Schools does have to offer to kiddos, to families, to parents. So there are school resources without question, and you have licensed folks who can absolutely help out.
Yeah. And I want to reiterate that just as a doctor for families, Cambridge is amazing and the resources that are there. And so people should definitely take advantage of it. Yeah, really appreciate it. Thank you. Ellen, I'd love to hear your thoughts about what this young person said about his parents, and your thoughts about what families can do when their kids are really struggling.
Yeah, thank you, Avra. Well, I first of all totally appreciate both Connor and Catherine's responses. I thought the interview was so skillfully and sensitively done, for one thing. So let me just take one quick step back just to give you a sense of my experience as a parent. So my daughter graduated in 2013. Her freshman year, she was a very quiet, reclusive kid. And her sophomore year, she burst out of this shy shell, went around the cafeteria with hundreds of cookies, introduced herself to everyone, and said she wanted to run for class president. She was class president in her sophomore and junior year. And she was also a good athlete. And she had 2 ACL tears. After the second ACL tear, it wasn't that she got, addicted to prescription drugs, but she kind of took a step back from her friends. And like Catherine said, all of a sudden this peer group shifted. And she wasn't friends with her athlete friends anymore. And she wasn't friends with her academics. And she'd been doing really well in school, and her grades started to slip. And I, like a lot of parents, didn't really see it coming because she had been such a little goody girl for her life, And she had always been a little nervous walking through Harvard Square, seeing the homeless guys. And now I found out a few years later, these were her best buddies, and that's where she started having access to alcohol. The guys in the square were buying them for her. So the unfortunate truth is that kids are very elusive, and they're very good at hiding, and they're very good at not letting you know what's going on. But a couple of the things that people have said really resonated with me. And I think the top word is connection. And to stay connected is vitally important. They're not just expect that they're going to hide and expect that they're going to lie. But I think what was also discussed is you can't confront, you can't yell, you can't plead. You can try to meet them where they're at, and you can try to create a sort of non-judgmental milieu for the conversation to start, and open-ended questions like, honey, I see your grades aren't doing as well as they were, or you don't seem happy, and really trying to draw them out into a conversation without being judgmental or stigmatizing them, but knowing that if they're on a path, it's going to be really hard to divert them. I think, Cambridge Ridge and Latin has really great resources, and I think definitely getting involved quickly and just giving a heads up to the teachers that are connected, or to the social workers or the counselors, and having them kind of do the work because they are more connected and the parents' influence is not as strong as you wish it were. I had to really kind of come to terms with my own helplessness through this, but don't underestimate, I guess that would be my message, is don't underestimate the power of staying connected and non-judgmental.
I would imagine you panicked, or I would have, and to stay calm and non-judgmental must be hard.
It's really hard, and I only say that more in retrospect than in the moment. I mean, there were a lot of ugly scenes in our house where I was called psycho mom because I wasn't staying calm and connected. I was screaming, and you weren't raised like this, and what are you doing, and how can you do this? You're shocked, you're scared, you're worried, and staying calm is probably the least possible thing you can do. In my group, I run this group for families, and one of the things that we really do emphasize a lot is not neglecting yourself. Because when you are so worried, oh, thank you for those little snaps, Connor. When you are so worried about your kid, you get completely consumed and you can't think or do anything else. And that's not helping you, and it's not helping them. So, just taking a step back, staying involved, but also not neglecting yourself, because your anxiety and worry is contagious, and you're not going to help them by showing your bad side. But the more you can kind of say, I'm okay, they're not happy with what they're doing. They know they're messing up. But if you kind of present a calm exterior, and it gives them a little confidence that they're not going to go down the tubes. Like, my parents aren't falling apart. They're okay. I'm going to be okay. I mean, I'm making it sound really simple. It's not. So it's a very, very hard thing. But I also just want to say that people do outgrow it, that it's not a terminal situation.
Hopefully.
Many
Yeah.
do.
Yeah,
Yes.
many do. Yeah. And I'll just add just a couple words about what I see with the families I care for is it definitely affects every member of the family, as you guys were all saying. And no matter how calm your exterior may be, it's taking a toll on everybody, and certainly their siblings and the parents' relationship. And yeah, so it's really hard. Yeah. And I mentioned to Connor and Kathy and Ellen and Mark and Pamela that I met yesterday. I run some addiction groups, and I met yesterday. I do it once a month with them. And I just asked what advice they might have for parents and families. It's a lot of what you guys said, but mostly open conversations with your children, and looking ahead before things get bad, and talking about what things to watch out for, and letting the kids know, I'm there for you, please talk to me. And then maybe you said it, Connor, or actually your client, about talking about people's own experience with friends or relatives or colleagues who had issues with substance use, and or people in the news, and just making it an important part of open conversation. So Mark, I'm wondering if there are any questions from the audience.
Yes. Before we get into that, just a couple quick things.
Yeah.
I want to acknowledge we've been joined by City Councilor-elect and current school committee member and fellow social worker Aisha Wilson is in the attendance. So thank you to her who's done tremendous work in helping to get social workers in every schools and really focus on social emotional health. And by school committee member Caroline Hunter, who's also done a tremendous amount of work in this space. So I just wanted to acknowledge them for being here and welcome them for being here. We do have some questions. One thing I just wanted to say, quickly, that Connor, your client, mentioned that I thought was really important, because I think we do this a lot with parents, is that he talked about, not taking these sort of extreme positions on things, like, if you drink at a party, it's terrible, horrible, it's, don't ever do that, to saying, oh, there's no problem, there's no issues at all, and that really the truth lies somewhere in the middle. And I think we do that a lot. What I would say to parents that are on this call, I think we do that a lot to parents as professionals, that a lot of the guidance we give is sort of on the extreme end of things, where even if you take, I've done a lot of work on screen time, right? And we say to parents, 30 minutes a day, 1 hour a day. Now, what's realistically, in the world that we live in, we know that is not realistic, but it sets parents up almost to feel like they're failures, right? If they don't do that. And it creates this unrealistic expectation. So, one thing I just wanted to point out, and Connor, I don't know if you have any, if you went deeper with that with your client, is just this idea of really, kids are going to experiment with things. That's their job at that age. And how do we as parents, allow a little bit of that to happen and accept that a little bit of that is going to happen and not feel like failures ourselves, or that our kids are failures in some way. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah.
Or any of you?
I'll just quickly chime in. So one of the biggest things that changed between the first college attempt and the second college attempt was the first college attempt was kind of under the very false cloud of I'm just gonna go cold turkey. I'll just, I'm gonna go to college, this is what I want to do, and I'm gonna figure it out. Which was a pattern if the individual had mentioned they had kind of quit at periods for a month or 2 months, but then it would usually relapse and just harder. So when that didn't work, the second attempt, what I did with this client, specifically not speaking for the other professionals he was working with, but my approach was to kind of co-create a list of absolute no's. So basically not me telling him these are the things that you can't do, but me asking him, hey, you had this experience at this first college and it went downhill. What do you have to say no to? And it's not going to be everything, but there might be some specific patterns or specific behaviors that you have realized are more likely to lead you down an unsustainable path rather than kind of one that's in that moderated, balanced area. And so instead of being like, you can't ever smoke or drink or do anything, it was, when can't you do it? And, we were able to, he was basically able to create his own list of things that, no smoking before class, no smoking. I don't remember exactly what all of them are at this point, but he was able to create those own barriers for himself that allowed him to, if he wanted to do something and he didn't have anything else to do, and it was, the point wasn't to demonize himself or feel like a failure, Mark, like you were saying, for parents. So not to create a completely unreasonable expectation for him, but to, put up some boundaries so that within there, there's going to be some behaviors that might be a little bit riskier than I or his parents would want. But ultimately, we know that if we just say you can't do anything, we know how that plays out. So again, giving the space for him to define kind of success, or I don't want to use the word failure, but to kind of define his own successful experience, and then, you know, be like, all right, if that's what you need to do to be successful, what support do we need to have around you to make that more likely? What should you avoid? Who should you be hanging out with? What peer groups should you try to stay away from, and et cetera? So that was the answer.
Mark, do you mind if I chime in?
Please.
I thank you, Connor. I appreciate that. And Mark, I just wanted to address kind of the parenting extreme and how we cannot necessarily, feel like failures if and when our kids do make some of these mistakes. Like we all suggested, particularly with misuse of drugs and addiction, it's a family issue. It becomes a family issue. I think our responses as adults and as parents are often extreme because they're coming from a place of fear. I think it's critical in a lot of my work, whether in school or privately, is to really include parents and caregivers in this mirror work, because you as an adult really need to understand and be mindful of why you're reacting and kind of creating what you're creating. This, you can't do this, or you can do this. Where does this come from? Is it this kind of, hyper fear of judgment from others, and kind of what are other people going to think of it? And just to be really aware and have some self-reflection in your reactions with your conversations with your kids. And that takes time, it takes process, it takes personal understanding. So along those lines, to be more gentle with ourselves and a bit more gracious.
Mm.
And I'm going to get to the. Go ahead.
I just wanted to add a quick kicker to that, which is the thing I suggest the most to parents in these instances is extreme self-care. And use the airplane analogy, where there's a reason why they say put your oxygen mask on first before you tend to your kids. And that same thing, where if you are afraid, you're anxious, you're worried, you're bringing all of that into whatever conversation you're having with them. And so if all you can do is work on yourself in that moment, so you're a little bit calmer, you're a little bit less judgmental, that's going to, in the long run, probably account for more than, just jumping on them and, laying down the law. And, that isn't going to be as effective in the long run.
Yeah, I just want to add one more little kicker to the kicker, and that is choose your time wisely. When they are in the midst of a substance holiday, let's say, or use, that is the absolute wrong time to try to have a normal conversation. It's much better to approach them when they're kind of chilling and in a calm state, and say something like, I noticed you came in late last night and I'm just wondering how you're feeling, versus when they walk in the door, you're drunk and you're this and you're that, and that is going to get nowhere fast. So choose your time wisely.
So a question from the attendees to kind of follow up on this, on the parenting theme we're on. Should parents who believe they themselves had problems with substance abuse in their teenage years and have recovered share this experience with their child?
Ellen, what do you think?
I think yes, I do. I think that it normalizes it, it destigmatizes it, it shows some compassion and understanding, and it also gives them confidence that, well, my parents are fully functioning person. Well, maybe not, we don't know, but we hope so. But, to say, like, because I think when you're in the middle of being under the influence, you may not see that there's any exit. So for a parent to say, yeah, I get it, I did it too. You don't have to give them all the gory details, but the PG experience, and just let them know that it is normal to experiment, and you're not blaming them, and you're not freaking out. So that's my take.
And I'd like to add, I talk about it a lot with my adult patients who have had issues with substance use. It's really important to let their children know that these things can run in families, often run in families, and that the risk is higher for them. And
Yeah.
it's just really important.
Catherine, anything from your experience at the high school on this?
Definitely. And I think normalizing it, I think coming from an empathetic perspective of I've been there, I've done this, and this is why we're having this honest conversation. I think it's really important as an adult, as somebody who has their own experiences, particularly if it's with drug use, misuse, that you really articulate, particularly developmentally. And this is my lens, guys, so I don't mean to repeat it, but developmentally, high school level, this is an opportunity for adults, for parents, for caretakers to say, well, why did I do this? Right. And to be able to identify and define for their kiddos in front of them, saying, well, mommy felt like she didn't belong. Mommy felt like she couldn't be funny unless I did this. Right. To really create the language around the feeling. Right. And that's my job. Right. So I do this all day, every day. And how relevant it is then to include the parent to say, yeah, we can do this. And this can be such an incredible, it's a learning experience for everybody involved, including the parents more often than not, because it sheds a light of, my goodness, a humanness to the fact that I feel this way, I think this way, and I make terrible decisions if and when they're really uncomfortable feelings, right? So for me, it's around why, identifying the thoughts, identifying the feelings associated with using, and normalizing the fact that no one wants to feel uncomfortable, right? Nobody wants to feel embarrassed. And this is all very normative and what we can do different. Yeah, I hope that makes sense.
Definitely.
Okay, next question, sort of following this path. Also, his parents' acceptance of his use. I think a lot of us might do that with our kids, especially with pot or alcohol, which are legal, so we don't alienate them and push them further away. Any thoughts on that?
What do you think, Connor?
Well, yes, is the short answer. I like to say that half the world's problems come from miscommunication and the other half come from no communication. So the more we're communicating with our children, with our caregivers, with our peers, with our professionals, with our support staff, the better it is. And so with these sorts of things, there is, as another saying in medicine, ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And so the sooner you start having these conversations, whether it's about, as a parent, your own experience with substances, a peer's experiences with substances, or just asking your child questions like, what do you know about alcohol or marijuana? And we live in a world where, as my client had alluded to, they already are exposed to these topics well before a parent is likely going to sit down and have an actual conversation with them. So the best first conversation I think to have is one of inquiry, one of kind of curiosity, just asking your child what they know, what their thoughts are. Do you know what your peers' thoughts are? And if you do it in that non-judgmental, I'm just trying to know what's going on, what's on your mind, and being prepared to maybe hear an answer or two that you're not necessarily comfortable with, going back to that, take care of yourself first. But giving them the space to explore, because what happens, not in every case, but in a lot of cases, like in this client, where he had for a while had a very solid identity of, I'm not going to use drugs and I'm not going to drink. And then as soon as it flipped, he didn't have the capabilities, the mechanisms, the skill to moderate. And so, that happens a lot of times. Parents, they see their kid like, oh, they're maybe, Ellen, this is maybe what happened to you. You see your angel baby, and then all of a sudden they drink the forbidden nectar. And because they hadn't had a lot of struggles in that area before, they hadn't developed the capabilities to manage it. So in some ways, the sooner you expose them these things, the sooner you let them fail, the sooner they'll learn, and fail early, fail often, fail forward. That's another thing I like to say. So yeah, give your kid the space and be very clear about what is and is not acceptable. I also want to be clear. We're not saying like, hey, if your kid wants to, invite the whole football team over and, throw a kegger on a Tuesday night, like we're not saying that, but, there has to be some conversation about like, here's what our expectations are. What are your expectations? And what should the expectations be in this family if either one of us aren't living up to our shared expectations or values? And if you have that conversation before the problem, it can be done in a much more casual, much more proactive and constructive way, as opposed to a reactive and just very agitated state. So yeah, the sooner you have the conversations, the better, I think.
And one good time to do it with Cambridge Public Schools is when our kids are taught it in school. And I can't remember because my kids are past older, but they go through, I don't know if you guys remember, but in middle school or before, where they get education about drugs and alcohol. And it's a great time. I remember my kids would come home and say, oh, we heard about all this stuff. And that's a great time to say, oh yeah, let's talk about that. What do you think? And is it something you've thought about? Are you worried? And so it's great our schools do it, and it's a great jumping off point for parents to keep it as an open conversation.
Next question from the Q&A. Catherine, this may be teed up for you. It says, what about the fake pills that kids are getting now? Kids are dying from fentanyl overdoses. Does CRLS make the test strips that a lot of colleges have available? I feel like this is a crisis that the city and schools aren't addressing. So what's available to kids at the high school?
Yeah, in fact, indeed, a crisis for sure. I know Narcan is readily available throughout CRLS, and it is located in various places throughout the building. For me, and in my role, a lot of this is around education, and I appreciate the fact that we're all kind of agreeing the sooner, the better, the non-judgmental kind of flavor of let's talk about what you're seeing, let's talk about what you're doing. A lot of kiddos, again, depending on age, and whether or not they have a sense of connection or belonging, kiddos are more likely to take that risk or less likely to take that risk, right? So the peer group is super relevant at this point, and decision-making is super relevant at this point. And what I've done is educate. And unfortunately, fake pills, things that are not monitored at all. I mean, they all have the likelihood of being laced with fentanyl. It has become a life or death conversation. And I think that's a really relevant thing to talk about with kids. It's not what it was years ago. I have to tell you that in my experience, in my lane, this is a life or death conversation. And I appreciate the fact that we're more so focused on alcohol and marijuana use. And there is so much more out there that is part of this conversation as well. And the Teen Health Center, bravo to those guys who are located in our building, is an awesome resource for any kind of medical intervention if and when we suspect something along those lines.
The fentanyl test strips are a great idea. I mean, maybe they have them at the health center. It's definitely something, we give those to people, but I don't know if schools do that. I don't know.
Yeah, I
I
think from
haven't
the
heard
city.
it.
Yeah, I was going to say from the city side, we don't, and I think this is something we have to look at in
Yeah.
making these kind of preventative uh, things available to young people. I mean, when I was at Ringe, and if I bought a bag of weed, the worst thing that could happen is that you got oregano or something, and you didn't die from it, right? And now so much is being laced with fentanyl that you're right, Catherine. It really is a life or death situation, and we need to really think more creatively about how to give kids the tools that if they're going to use this, that they at least can do so in a safer way than um, and this there's another thing that there's relates to this last question I'm about to ask from the audience. But we had an incident. My twins are at Cambridge Street Upper School. They're in 8th grade. And my daughter came home probably 2 weeks ago now. And one student had given another student a gummy, a cannabis, gummy as a piece of candy.
Mm,
That student ended up being collapsing on the floor and being unresponsive and needing CPR, which was
wow.
obviously devastating to that student, but also devastating to the class, my daughter and the other kids in the class who watched their peer. And so, um, it just shows like how this is sort of infiltrating into younger years, right? Not high school, middle school. But how tricky it can be for kids to navigate it. It looked like a piece of candy, right? And so the question from the audience was, I wonder if the panel knows how much the legalization of marijuana has impacted its overuse in young people. So I don't know if you want to take a few minutes to talk about that.
Well, I'll just tell you because I ask, it's just part of our intake when we meet patients for the first time. And I don't know the numbers in my patient population, but it's so high. And in teenagers, oof, it's really, really high. It's really, really high, and it's worrying to me. And like your client said, Connor, well, I guess I see more of people feeling like it's just a really good thing and it's healthy, and because people use it medically, which actually it's not indicated as the first treatment for anything medically, but it's a big, I mean, I'm glad it's legal. I'm really glad for lots of different reasons, but I think it's made it seem benign to people, not dangerous. And in fact, it can make people pass out, and it can be, as they used to say, and still true, the gateway to other more serious things.
Anyone
I
else
couldn't
want to,
agree with
Catherine?
you. Oh, sorry. I couldn't
No, go
agree
ahead. I was
more
going to.
with you, Dr. Goldman. There's always this fine line of, being straightforward and then being incredibly permissive, right? So the normalization piece of the use has kind of spilled over a little bit within family systems, I think, particularly around poor boundaries, right? And not really understanding kind of their position as a role model. Unfortunately, I've been in many situations where I've had to file, with DCF around, joint use with an adult parent and an underage child, so the accessibility piece of it and this normalization and legalization, though I do have opinions about it, I'm not being harsh about that. It has, when there's lack of education or there's dysfunction in the family in the first place, this is just, it becomes another layer of permissiveness, if you will, that creates really poor boundaries, just, more dysfunction, if you will.
Ellen or
To
Connor.
I was to say, to add to this, I think beyond like the normalization, another complicating factor, something that I've kind of thought a lot about in just like if I were, if I were a teen now, essentially, and just thinking about the differences in substance use now versus when I was at Ringe, however, I don't want to date myself, but it was a little time ago. And just the prevalence of vaping and how much and the edibles and how easy it is to do this stuff in like a sneaky way. Because it used to be, if you wanted to get high, you had to do the whole like burning the joint or the bowl, and it smells and there's smoke and it takes time. Whereas now, you can, if you have a vape, you can do it in a class. If you have a gummy, you can do it in the cafeteria. And so it's not just that it's legalized, it's that the mechanisms for delivery have become much, the barrier for getting high is lower. It's easier to do, and the intensity, I'm blanking on the word, the potency, like how potent actual like the chemicals are, has also increased dramatically as well. And so it all goes back into the educating people that, just like you, when you were teaching kids about nutrition, we say, oh yeah, not all calories are created equal, like a lettuce is not a Skittle, and those sorts of things. And likewise, the weed you might buy from a medical marijuana dispensary is very different from a vape cartridge you might buy from somebody on the street. And knowing the differences, that they're not all the same, the potency is not all the same, and it goes back into having those conversations and the education component as well, just making sure that they're prepared.
And we could get into a whole, we can get into a whole thing about the legalization and I mean, the other part is that, what we've done with legalization, I think, is because of the taxes we've put on it and everything else, we've made it very expensive, and we've really made it legal for middle class people to buy their weed, right? Kids are still not going into, kids are not going into a marijuana dispensary and paying twice as much as what they could pay on the street. And so they're not even getting necessarily the I don't want to say the quality, but they're still, they're getting the delivery aspects of it, but not necessarily with some of the safeguards that go around it, because it's expensive to buy it legally. But I want to move on because we're getting up against it. We got 10 minutes left. Folks in the audience, if you have last questions, please submit them. A comment from Sarah Lincoln from the Public Health Department, Cambridge Public Health Department. Test strips, that the Cambridge Health Department has test strips and gives them out during various distribution events across the city. So that's good. The city does that. Maybe we can talk more offline about maybe how to make that connection a little stronger with the schools and get them into the, I don't know if they're in the health center in the schools or not. But that's very good to know. And then another comment, often it seems that student overdoses, even death from overdosing, accidental or otherwise, or from fentanyl possibly, are not publicized because families do keep this confidential. But isn't that part of what keeps people, including young people, in the dark about the risks? Does the city keep track of deaths or hospitalizations due to overdoses? So I'll just take that last bit a little bit. I don't know. And Sarah, if you want to put something in the Q&A and add to this, since from the health department's perspective, that would be great. I know from the city council perspective and some of the city perspective, I don't know how much we keep track of the hospitalizations. We do get reports on overdose deaths in the city. I believe last year there were 44 in the city. So we do keep track of that, and we do get that information. I'm not sure we publicize it well enough, or we probably don't. But I know we do keep track of that. I don't know, Catherine, do you have anything in terms of on the schools? Does the schools, do they report things? I mean, they must. Do they keep track of any data at the school level, or?
I don't know if I'm the right person to answer that specifically. I know that I, as a professional there, keep track of the kiddos who are returning from hospitalizations. whatever that hospitalization may be, whether it's a long-term medical hospitalization, a long-term treatment program, if you get the gist. So I do re-enter kiddos who are returning from hospitalization. So there are numbers for hospitalizations. Specifically, why they're admitted is a whole different conversation, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And how do folks feel about, Connor, Ellen, how do you feel about, this idea that, because people want to keep their personal stories private because it's obviously very painful and there's stigma and everything else, just sort of, but that can sometimes mean that we're not, it may not seem like it's as big an issue as maybe it really is. And so that keeps people in the dark. So that whole part of the question, what do you think about that?
Yes, so I could jump in with that. I think it really opens a lot of avenues of conversation. I think the first thing to kind of emphasize is that it's an equal opportunity affliction. Like people have kind of stereotypes in their head about who is most likely to be affected by substance use, and it's all across the board. And I, for one, this may sound a little, I don't know, rebellious or something. I, for one, wish AA would change its name because I think the anonymous piece is not helping anybody. I think it adds to the stigmatization. If somebody breaks their leg and they're walking around on a crutch, or if they have diabetes, I'm not sure if I would call it a disease. I know there's a lot of controversy around that, but like Ava said before, it runs in families. So people are certainly predisposed, but the more it's hidden and the more it's stigmatized, it doesn't help anybody. It adds to the shame of it versus the opposite of shame is compassion. And when you hear about somebody who has struggled or died or overdosed, it opens a conversation, and I think it's helpful. One of my daughter's best friends and classmate, also a RING graduate, 2013, died last year of an overdose. He was a brilliant kid. He was deeply loved. Hundreds of kids came to his funeral. He died in New York City. He died in the subway of a tiny, like a grain of fentanyl. And his family was so open about it, and hundreds of kids came and celebrated his life. And I really think that they did the right thing by not hiding it. It also increases their own pain when you're that hidden about it. So I say let it hang out because you're helping yourself and you're helping your community.
We're up against it, so I want to kick it back to Avra to finish us out. But I do want to say, Pamela, since you're the only one with access to the chat, Sarah Lincoln put in the Q&A from the health department that yes, we do keep track on a quarterly basis. She thinks this is something my coworker Danielle McPeak works more closely on, but our latest citywide report, and she put the link in there. If you can maybe grab that and put it in the chat so that people can see it, that would be great. So Avra, back to you to finish us off, and thank you, everybody.
Yes. Oh, thank you, Mark. And thank you, Pamela. We're really grateful to you, Pamela, for making this all work. So it's a big, heavy thing. I love what you said, Ellen, about the anonymous part. Yeah, I mean, the shame part, and you talked about it, Connor, and your client as well. Like the stigma attached to it. And I say this to my patients, we should treat it like it's high blood pressure or it's diabetes, because it is a disease state. People can do really, really well with treatment, or they can come off it like Ellen's daughter, and hopefully your client will. But it shouldn't carry more shame than these other things that we treat openly and without any problems. So I think if we could take home lessons from tonight, it shouldn't be anonymous. It should be shared. It's a burden shared, or sorrow shared is half a sorrow, something like that. And then we have these wonderful programs in our schools. We have these wonderful programs in our health department. Families in support groups like the one Ellen runs. I think that can be a really, really helpful thing. So I would love to have us leave tonight with hope and just staying really, really open with our kids and our families and our clients, and not to be ashamed. I think those are really, really important things. So I really, really want to thank especially our panelists, Ellen, Kathy, and Connor. You guys have put in a lot of thought and gone through a lot of emails, and we really appreciate your time and your expertise. And so to any people who have been part of this webinar, you're welcome to join us at the Healthy Children's Task Force. It's a pretty easy lift. It's just once a month. And if you're interested, can they email you, Mark? And maybe we can put you guys on the list. We'd love to have more members. And as Mark had said, we talk about lots of different issues that are important to children and families in our wonderful community of Cambridge. So thanks.
Yeah, I think Pamela actually has Pamela, can you share that form on the screen that people can fill in, or we would love to have more people join the task force. I don't know. She can do that. If not, people can certainly email me. Probably the easiest email to remember is just my personal one, which is markmcgovern@gmail.com. And then I'd be happy to get you hooked up with the task force and have you join. That would be wonderful. Oh, there we go.
Great. Thank you.
And just again, I want to offer my thanks to everybody for participating, for being here, and to our panelists for sharing. And again, keep an eye out. We're going to be doing several, I think we're trying to do 4 webinars a year on different issues that pertain to children and families. So please stay tuned and look for that. Share with your friends to get, the more people to attend, the better. And we're obviously always happy to get any feedback from anybody on things that we could be doing differently. All right. I think that's it.
Have a great night. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thank you
Good
so
night.
much.
Bye.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Bye.
Pamela?
Good job.
And yeah, I thought that went well.
I thought they were great.
Yeah. Good. Pamela, you there?
Yeah,
Your
just
score.
give me 1 second. I'm here.
Yeah. Thank
Turn
you.
off the
Thank
recording.
you.
I know, I'm trying to do a whole bunch of things all at once here.
I know you are. Yeah.